fellow at Rothermere American Institute at Oxford University. So Tom, then Trump is obviously threatening even more tariffs on China. I mean, it could see Chinese goods, as I was saying there, smacked with 104% tax. I mean, can you really see all of this happening?
I'm afraid I can. I think it's quite plausible. And I would say we're already in the middle of a very, very brutal trade war, at least in the case of the US and China. Whether that will continue, I think, is a more interesting question. I think it's more likely with China than the other countries Trump's put tariffs on, because if you look at political opinion in the United States, I would say the sweet spot is being free trade with most of the world, being protectionist with China. There's a great deal of hostility to the Chinese Communist Party in the US and a great deal of fear. So while I think President Trump himself is a general protectionist, he isn't necessarily particularly targeting China. He's likely to get more support for moves on China than on other countries, so it's likely to go on longer.
So if you think that politics is really driving this, I mean, can you see either of these two sides backing off? Will it be China, or do you think it's going to be Trump?
I mean, clear. I don't necessarily say I think President Trump's policy. I think he's very sincere that deficits are bad, trade deficits are bad, tariffs are necessary. I think he's very unclear what he wants instead, whether he wants continuous tariffs, whether he wants a negotiated deal. I think in the case of some countries like Israel and the UK, a deal is very likely. He also has to deal with a political context, which I think is less true for China than other countries, where he's getting massive domestic opposition. And at some point, he's likely either to have these tariffs struck down by the courts or to have Congress override them. But I think it'd be quite a long journey till we get there. China, I know less about their political system. It's harder to follow as well. But I think the two things the Chinese government can sell their public on are that they produce relatively high prosperity by historic standards, and that they're standing up for China being strong. And they're a bit in tension here. On the one hand, these tariffs are very worrying from prosperity. On the other hand, looking like they're giving in will make China look weak and undermine their support among their own public. It's not just the United States that has politics here, which I think is something very important for all the story of the Trump tariffs.
Indeed, but if we look at also the bigger picture, I mean, we're already seeing changes to the global supply chains. I mean, ripples, you could say at least. For example, the UK deciding that it's going to delay shipments of cars to the US. So if either side were to retaliate, I mean, how bad could all of this really get for the global economy then, especially when we're talking about global supply chains?
I mean, I think the US-China escalation could get very bad indeed for the world economy. Like, China's most important exporter to the US. One thing worth noting is that the US for itself isn't as trade dependent as most other nations. There's a paradox that the US is President Trump has done this, is at the epicenter of these trade restrictions. And also there's a certain degree which imports and exports are substitutable. So I don't think one should underrate the degree to which the US can buy from Vietnam and maybe Korea and Cambodia and India instead of China, particularly over a period of time. The thing is, though, they've got quite large tariffs on them as well. So it's one thing to be selectively protectionist against China. It's a lot more dangerous for the US economy to be protectionist against basically the rest of the world to varying degrees. There's been very interesting that China is potentially coordinating with South Korea and Japan, which is very new and unusual. So I think we will see. My suspicion is Trump's tariffs against most of the world are going to fall in the medium term. But I think China, I think the question is, are the Chinese willing to offer Trump a deal that he will accept, that he can, at least to himself and possibly to the world, broadcast as a win? That's kind of what they did in the lesser version of this that happened in the first Trump administration. Otherwise, I think this just could go on and on and on.
It could indeed, and who knows what will happen next, especially when it comes to the US President Donald Trump. Tom Packer, thank you so much for giving your analysis on the program.
Thank you.